they're interested.
I forgot indeed. Thanks, Peter. I just remembered. Perfect.
Yeah. So good morning or good evening, everybody, depending on where you are. It's great to have everybody here. About 12, 13 years ago, I sat in my office in Munich, and after looking at hundreds and hundreds of organizations as a venture capitalist, I realized the way business is done isn't really working anymore. If we invest in organizations and they're all growing and they're all everything is growing, something needs to balance that out. And I realized that's going to be nature. So the way we operate business, I realized, is not sustainable anymore. It's not sustainable for us individually, and it is not sustainable for our planet at large. Plus, I realized that there are a bunch of global changes coming our way, and that for that reason alone, we need to change the way we lead organizations. By now, if you open the newspaper, many of these global changes have hit us, and we're all realizing that something needs to change. It doesn't matter, let me just go through the presentation here, whether it's globalization, which is going to disrupt everything, add a huge level of complexity and change to everything that we do, or whether it's digitalization, where we talk to organizations and they have this phrase, digitalization, which sometimes we just don't know what it really is. There's a big question mark what this digitalization is. Is it technology change? Is it business model change? Or maybe are there cultural changes that need to involve with that? Or maybe everything. Then obviously we have the generational changes as the millennials are coming in with a completely new work ethic. I just recently read a survey that 75% of the millennials want to be famous and want to have a purpose and make a difference in life. So there's a completely new set of expectations that companies, especially larger organizations, are confronted with on how to really produce whatever we want to produce, whether it's cars or microchips or whatever, with a completely different mindset and expectation of our talent that we are hiring. And then obviously what I mentioned, it's the climate change. If you just look at this graphics, this is the increase of global natural disasters that has happened over the last 50 years. We work with a large insurance company, and every single investment that they do is vetted through a climate assessment. So this is becoming a very critical part of every part of business in the future. And lastly, just open up the news and you'll see that we have a bunch of geopolitical changes that are happening, which are adding a completely new set of uncertainty to what we're doing. When we speak with organizations, what we find, or as individuals, as a matter of fact, is that we typically react with three different ways. The first strategy is that we revert back to old principles. You can see that happening in the political world, but also in many organizations. That as transformations happen in our world, that we go back to old principles of pushing harder, controlling more, increasing revenues by 20% no matter what, and we're trying to dominate the system more. And what we find is that it's not working long term. We are at an evolutionary stage in history, and evolution can be maybe avoided for a few years or few centuries, but it can't be stopped. That's what history shows. And along the way, if we use these old principles, a lot of people are going to be suffering, which we are seeing right now in the political system as well. So the second strategy that we see, which many organizations are taking, is to cope with the new world. Basically to look at, we have a new environment out there, globalization, digitalization, whatever you want to call it, and we're attacking these problems by changing our strategies and processes. How can we hire different people? How can we get more women into leadership positions, for example? The issue with that is that we are still dealing with the old mindsets, and that we are still dealing with a problem at hand and not coming from a different consciousness. And if any of you have done martial arts, karate or aikido or something, you know that if there's somebody coming at you with a weapon, you don't look at the weapon. You need to look at the bigger picture in order to effectively deal with the situation. So to focus on the problem leads us to contract and leads us to go into fear mode. And then we are not flexible to deal with the global picture. What some companies are doing, and I believe this is what's necessary, is that we need to have a leap in consciousness. That it's really requiring not new processes, not new strategies, but really a new thinking, a new consciousness in order to harness the opportunities that are in front of us. And with every fundamental change in our history, which we are going through right now, there are huge opportunities that are coming out as a result of that. I was just showing these little graphics before here. Some of you might know the movie Ants, which is about this little fellow here that goes out and is being ousted from the tribe, basically. And he leaves the tribe, and then he goes through all kinds of hardship through the desert here, and he has to find a canoe and go over a body of water, over a pond. And then he finds this trash can with all these amazing food things that it is. From an ant's perspective, from our human perspective, these changes that we are facing are horrendous. They're really, really, really challenging. What's happening in this Ants movie, which I love, is at the end of the movie, they pan out and they show that the entire movie, the entire drama that we've seen for the past 1.5 hours takes place at a trash can in Central Park. And if we would take this different perspective, we would see so many more opportunities and so much relation of the hardship that the little guy was going through and how he could have coped with it in a different way, maybe. So I believe what's necessary is that we have, when I go back to this slide here, we have to have this leap in consciousness. We have to find this new perspective, this new thinking, if we want to harness the opportunities that are at hand. So basically, what I've been asking myself when I was sitting in my office in Munich about 12 years ago is how can I make this transition for myself to create a way that I'm more fulfilled, that I'm more in my authentic power at work? And how can we help organizations find a step-by-step approach to make this transition? If you look around, you'll see many books that have come out about conscious capitalism, conscious business, authentic leadership, compassionate capitalism, whatever you call it. So we're all moving into the same direction. What we've been missing is a step-by-step approach that can help us make this transition. A step-by-step approach that works for us individually, if we want to make this transition, if we are leaders and we are managing an organization, or for an organization as a whole. So we've asked the same question: how can we make this transition for the past, I don't know, 8-9 years probably, and came up with this model that we are now using in our organizations that we work with. Let me lead you through this real quickly. If you look at these 4 quadrants and imagine yourself being inside an organization and you're just having a job at an organization. If you look at this top left quadrant here, the individual, if you could show up into that in that organization, in that job, and be fully yourself, fully authentic, have fun at work, express your gifts, no need to be shrinking or be afraid of something. That would be one part of this. The second part on the top right corner here is to be connected to a team where we would feel the genuine connection, the joy of being with each other, maybe even share a vacation with our peers. Feel that sense of genuine connection that we are all seeking to with our peers and our team members. And then on the bottom left quadrant, if we are pursuing a common purpose, if we're here to make a difference together, because all of us want to make a difference in this world. And lastly, on the bottom right corner, if we can make money doing that and be sustained financially, both as an organization or as an individual, if you check in with yourself, you'll find that there's really no reason why you would want to leave that job. Because business is not about business, it's really about human behavior. We all want to express ourselves, top left quadrant. We all want to have connection to other people, top right quadrant. We all want to make a contribution, bottom left quadrant. And we all want to be sustained, bottom right quadrant. The problem is that when we work with organizations, we find that they mostly focus on this. Of course, we do team building. Of course, the company develops a mission these days. Of course, we are trying to find the right individuals and support them. But when something hits the fan, when there's a finance crisis coming, when there's uncertainty knocking on the door, most organizations we find fall back to this bottom right quadrant, which is to create profits and margins. And with that, most of the other quadrants that we are seeking for as individuals are left empty. And that's why we're not fulfilled at our job. That's why we're not able to harness that potential that's inside of our organizations. So basically what we've done is we've created an approach where we can fulfill these 4 quadrants. These 4 quadrants plus this leadership circle around here, this green circle, to create a leadership model where individuals are able to create these organizations that are fulfilled and inspired. So the models that we've developed basically are these 5 steps, a module for each of these quadrants that we lead individuals through, leaders through, or organizations through. And by that, have a step-by-step approach to move to this new business paradigm. Today, I would like to focus on this second module, the principles for building fulfilling relationships and great teams. Why do I want to do that? Because when you open the news, there's a lot of stuff happening. And we're all at a certain stage freaking out and seeing what can we do to deal with these circumstances. And when we're in this uncertainty mode, we tend to not operate very empowered. And oftentimes it bleeds over into our relationships, to ourselves, to our team members, to our spouse, to our environment. Over the years, and you might have seen that in the video that we've sent out before, over the years, we've found that pretty much every problem that leaders bring to us has a relationship component, that it ultimately boils down to relationships. And unfortunately, what we find is that there's a big question mark, that there's a big, how can I deal with relationships in a better way? If I'm in a meeting and I'm getting attacked and there's a high pressure cooker situations, how can I deal with that in a better way? I just got a call yesterday from somebody that said, I have a team member that's just impossible to work with. And other people say, he's a know-it-all. How can I deal with that situation? For some reason in our world, we haven't quite learned how to deal with these critical situations. That's why we've developed these 8 principles to provide you with a toolbox, basically, or a reference guide that you can use in order to build more fulfilling relationships that work for yourself, in order to build the relationships that help you in your career, and in order to build the relationships that help build fulfilling teams. So what we have found is that over the years that there are really 8 principles that we can lead pretty much every issue down to. So if we can have an awareness of these principles, 4 personal principles and 4 team principles, then we can shift the situation. We can show these principles to some of our team members and have them become more understanding of it, and by that shift the way we operate in our teams. So today I would just like to take a few moments, this next half, 3/4 hour that we have here, to lead you through these principles, to give you an overview of each of these principles. I have to make a little disclaimer here, though, that obviously we don't have much time to go in very much depth, but I would like to give you this tool set because I think, especially in today's times, it's very, very helpful and important to have this kind of a tool set and a reference guide that we can fall back to. Since we don't have much time, what I encourage you to do, if you still have it, use a pen and paper and write down notes and write down some questions if you have that we can maybe address in the questions section that we have at the half hour and then towards the end of this seminar. Okay, now sit back and take in these principles. What I would ask you to do is consider these principles and say, if these principles were alive in my organization, if these principles were alive in my team or in my relationship, how would the quality of my team, the way I lead my relationships, how would the quality change? Okay, bear that in mind as we go through it. So let's get started. The first principle is the learning principle. This is a very fundamental principle because it is at the root of every conflict that experience in our world. Let me give you an example. Let's say you go into a meeting tomorrow morning and you propose a new product or a new product idea. And the other person that's sitting across the room from you says, no, I don't believe this works. We've tried it many times and I don't believe that works. I've been here for 20 years. This is not going to work. Just a pretty basic conflict situation. What we usually do, and check in with yourself whether that's true for yourself, what we usually do is we try to become clear about our point, and we try to make an argument to convince the other person. So basically what we do is we dig our heels into the ground and say, well, I believe this is true because this. And the other person goes, no, I don't believe it's true because of this. By that time, it's all downhill, because we have a conflict, and it's not about us anymore, about a common solution, but it's about me and about you. So this learning perspective versus the knowing perspective is a huge issue in organization that's very subtle, but it's very pervasive. If we take the knowing perspective, I know it's not true, for example, there's always a judgment concerned with that. And there's always the I am challenged, or my identity might be challenged, associated with that. And with that, we have an ego-based approach to business and not a team-centric approach to business. So when we work with organizations, we basically leave them with this principle also to have a vocabulary that they can just say learner or knower, which side are we on at the moment, to keep each other accountable. As we move into the learner perspective, what we need to do is to genuinely put our agenda on hold and say, wait a minute, I'm not pushing my idea forward that there's a new software product that I want to develop, for example. I'm shifting my perspective to genuinely wanting to understand what the other person knows that I might not know. Maybe there's something I can learn here. At least maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but I'm going to listen. So the mindset that the learner brings is an openness and a desire to understand and a desire to learn. The very important thing about this principle is that it has to be genuine. If we're just practicing this as something we do, I'm going to learn from this person now and then I'm going to feed it back to him that it's not working, don't use this principle. Unless it's a consciousness principle where your mindset is genuine and says, I really would like to understand what this other person sees that I might not see. So you can see that as you open the newspaper and read the articles that are happening today, there are many opportunities to go into the learner mode instead of saying, oh my God, this stupid idiot, what's happening in our world out there? What can we do? So that's the learner principle. Very powerful principle, but it's a consciousness mind shift. The second principle is what we call the actor principle. This principle determines whether you're being seen as a manager, as somebody who juggles a bunch of balls in the air and watches out that none of these balls drop, which is valuable in itself, or whether you're being seen as a leader. Or in a personal life where you're in your driver's seat or in the passenger seat of your life. Essentially, this principle determines whether you are in charge of your life or whether you are, quite bluntly, a victim to outside circumstances. You might know of people that like to point fingers and say, it's his fault, it's that fault, it's not my fault. It's very simple to see that many people like to take on the victim role in order to look good, as we say. But if you look at another situation, for example, when we go into a meeting and we say, I'm really sorry, I'm late, I was stuck in traffic. Or if you're invited to your birthday party, birthday party of your friend, and you tell him, I'm sorry, I can't come, I have to go to a business meeting in New York. This sends a subtle message that we are not in the driver's seat of your life. We are not in our actor role. Why? Because we are blaming the outside circumstances for our situation. In this case, the traffic jam or our boss telling us that we have to go to New York. What we can do is we can shift to the actor role. For that, we have to understand that we are part of the circumstance and we have to take responsibility, at least partially, for the situation we're in. So if we come into a meeting, what we can do is we can simply change the phrase to, I'm really sorry I'm late for the meeting, I didn't take traffic into consideration. Or when we go to the birthday party, we could say, I'm deciding to go to New York, or I choose to go to New York. I'm sorry, I won't be able to come to your birthday party. It might just look like a little semantic change, a different wording, but you can see that, again, it requires a different consciousness. If we don't have this consciousness, we won't be able to say these words in an authentic way. If you check in, if you go into a meeting tomorrow or any other time and you hear people talk from a reactor perspective and not from the actor perspective, check in with yourself. How does it make you feel? Do you really see this person as a leader, or do you see this person as a manager who is ultimately at the mercy of outside circumstances? We might not realize consciously, but when we speak in a way that's not the actor mindset, we are sending a very subtle message that other people receive on an unconscious level. And we are creating a perception without even knowing it consciously of a manager versus a leader. And since advancement in our professions and our job is based on perception, not on deliverables, at least at higher positions, that's not something we want to do. So principle number 2 is the actor principle. Let's move on to the third principle, authentic communication. Very few pictures here because it's such a big principle that I didn't know what to put on the screen, quite frankly. The principle of authentic communication is huge because everything we want to do in life, everything we want to achieve in life involves communication. Obviously, we can go to the mailbox and mail a letter without communicating much. But everybody of you has experienced if we want to achieve anything in life that's substantial, we need to communicate. Unfortunately, we have found that it's not working quite well. I can't tell you how many of our coachees and how many of our clients ask us, in this kind of a situation when my boss demands 20% cost cuts and I know my people are burning out, what can I say without saying no? That's not possible because nobody wants to hear a no, basically. How can I communicate in these pressure cooker situations in a way that's more empowered and that creates connection instead of separation? What we have found is that Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communications approaches are extremely powerful and extremely valuable for this. However, we've also found that these approaches are very challenging. So if we are a leader that is completely busy, I don't really have the time or the energy or the focus on learning a completely new way to communicate oftentimes. So what we've done is we've basically worked with a nonviolent communication team and changed the approaches and basically distilled some nuggets that are really applicable for the business world. I just want to leave you with 2 of these nuggets today. The first one is this one here. It's always about feelings and needs. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. We had a coachee that was a vice president at a large organization. One day, out of the blue, his senior vice president came to him and said, my dear Tom, I'll call him, my dear Tom, I'll ask you to let go of 4 people and let me know by Monday who you want to let go of. We have to save money. We have to save 20% of our cost. Our coachee, our client was, to be honest, beyond pissed. He was so frustrated that after 18 years, he was ready to leave the organization. And he said to me on the phone, if this was my own company, I would put my house on the market in order to save my people because this is so important to me and we can't do that with our people. That's how tight it was. So obviously he picked up the phone and called his boss back and said, I don't know how we can do that. We're so maxed out. It's just not working. We're just burning out our people. I can't really do that. And the boss said, okay, I don't really care, but you have to save those 20% costs. So let me know who you want to let go by Monday. I don't want to hear about it. Click. Communication was over. So at that time, our client was very frustrated because he didn't get a call back from his boss. Communication stopped. So when we spoke with him, we basically tried to understand what was going on this level of feelings and needs that I'm outlining on the screen here. And we basically asked what his boss's needs are and his feelings. And he said, well, he's really under pressure. And he said he needs to desperately save 20% cost cuts. That's what is mandated by the board, so he has to fulfill it. Okay, did you feed that back to him? No, I didn't. I was so upset. Okay, what are your feelings? I'm really concerned that my people are burning out, he said. And what is your need? I need to understand how we can combine this. We need to save 20% cost cuts and we need to keep our people here. So how can we do that? So we formulated a sentence together with him that he basically left his boss, which sounded something like this. If I hear that I have to let go of 4 people by Monday morning, I'm really, really concerned about the sustainability of of our people here, that they are burning out, and the quality of our products. I need to understand how we can save the 20% cost cuts. He's feeding back his needs, and how we can make this work without letting anybody go. I have a suggestion. Can we have a conversation on the phone? Within 30 minutes, he received a call from his boss, and they agreed on a solution where nobody was let go. Again, it's a day-to-day problem that we have, but the challenge is to communicate in a way that opens doors to new opportunities rather than closing doors and becoming tied up. If we are able to go to this level, we are able to hear people's needs. And this is the second nugget that I'm going to leave you with in this little section here. All people want is to be heard in life. That's it, period, end of story. If we can feed it back to him, their needs, their desires, they can relax. Like the boss of our client here. He will say, okay, he's hearing me, 20% cost cuts, we can do that. I can relax, he's with me. So, principle of authentic communication, big principle. Remember, it's always about feelings and needs, and all people want is to be heard. Let's move on to the next one, which is the principle of navigating conflicts. We can have a lot of nice ideas, but when the rubber meets the road is really in a conflict situation. Again, I can't tell you how often we get calls where we say, I have this conflict with this person. I just don't know how to deal with it. Personally, I never liked conflicts. As a matter of fact, I avoided them at all costs because they just made me feel really, really uncomfortable. Until the point where I realized that it is really in times of conflict when we build relationships. Think about it. We can go and have a party. We can go and have a good time for years. But the time when we really build a relationship, when we really build trust in our relationship and deepen our relationship is in the times of challenge and conflict. One of my mentors says, Peter, the quality of a relationship is determined by the space between the people in which conflict can be addressed. Let me repeat that. The quality of a relationship is determined by the space between the people in which conflict can be addressed. Unfortunately, again, it's something that we haven't learned yet. The way we usually approach this is by using two of these principles that we have talked about before. The first one is the learning principle, and the third one is this principle about feelings and needs, which is part of the authentic communication part here. So again, let me give you an example. Let's look at Annie and Dan here. Let's say you're running an organization and you're looking for a new marketing manager. And you have Annie and Dan as candidates. And 50% of your team says, Annie is really great. We should hire Annie. And 50% says, Dan is really great. We should hire Dan. So if you're a leader, what are you going to do? If you go for Annie, you might lose 50% of that of your team. If you go for Dan, you might lose the other 50%. So rethink this. If we use the learning principle and going to feelings and needs, we can deal with this conflict in a much more proactive way. So you can go into the facilitator mode and start learning. You can ask your groups of people and say, let me understand, why do you think we need Annie? What are your needs? What are your feelings and needs behind this? And they might say, well, we feel Annie has a corporate background, so she can scale with us. Or she's just really, really meticulous and thorough, so I think she would be a great candidate for this. Okay, and the other group might say, well, Dan is entrepreneurial. He really has new and fresh ideas for our marketing. And he's just a fun guy to be with, so it's great to have in our team. So by going to the level of needs and the deeper level, you can actually have both groups completely agree on this. They can come together and say, well, I agree that it would be good to have a person that we can have fun with on the team. And it would be good to have a person that we can scale with and has a corporate background. So although there's a difference in the room, if we go to a level deeper and level deeper and level deeper and go to the essence of what we really want, we can find that people are coming together at that level, which is basically the level of values. If you can do that, the outcome of the negotiation here, whether it's Annie or Dan, really doesn't play a role anymore. At that point, you might say, well, maybe neither Annie or Dan are the right candidates here. But what you've done is you've used the conflict to deepen the relationship, to deepen the conversation, and to actually have a conversation about the common values of the team. And by that, strengthen the values of the team or the relationship. And secondly, what we've written down here is you improve intimacy. You're able to see into the people what really drives them. We need somebody to have fun with. We need somebody who's thorough. That's what's driving people. As you create intimacy, which is basically the basis for intimacy, it's the basis for trust. So by operating in this way and going to this deeper level, you create trust in your team. That's the principle for navigating conflict. Since it's a day-to-day principle that we can use basically in any situation, let's take a quick little break here. And I would like to hand over to Clemens to do a little bit of a reflection about this principle so you can actually feel it in your body, how this difference feels like.
Thanks, Peter. And I would like you to invite all of you to really take a step back from what we just presented on and take a comfortable seat where you are right now, if you haven't taken that. I mean, you're listening to us, so maybe you may be in that comfortable place already. Before we go into a situation where you think about one of the last conflicts you have had, come back to your body and really feel where you're sitting and feel your feet on the floor. I'm inviting you to do that so that you can really come from your core into that situation of reflection and move a bit out of the thinking space. And when you feel the feet on the floor, I would like you to put your attention to how you're sitting on the chair and feel where you're sitting. And then just follow your breath, inhaling and exhaling. And from this place, being connected to yourself, take a moment and go back to the first conflict that comes to mind. A situation where you were in conflict with another person. And for a moment, you really just imagine the setup. Where were you at that time? Who was the other person? How did the other person look like? What was this fight about, this conflict about? Were you standing or were you sitting? How did you feel in the situation of this conflict? Were you angry? Were you excited? Were you really engaged into the conflict? Could you feel your body at that moment, or were you in your thoughts? And what did you think about the other person? Did you think about the other person at all, or were you convinced that you were right? What were you thinking at that moment in that conflict? And then you may either really change a chair into a second chair, or you just imagine that you change position and move over to the other person that you had the conflict with. Move over and look back at yourself, being aside next to the other person, or maybe being the other person. How did the situation look like for the other person? What did this other person that you had to fight with see? How did that person see you behave in that moment? And how did this other person probably feel on that other side? Was the other person comfortable where he or she was at that time? What was the other person thinking that maybe he or she did not express and wanted to express but was scared to express? And finally, what did this other person need at that moment in time? What would have helped this person to calm himself or herself down? What did he or she really need at that moment and did not manage to express? And then I would like to ask you to take a step outside the scene, like you were a third party looking at the two of you, the other person and yourself. What can you learn from that third party perspective? How does the situation look like from this third party perspective? Maybe you're inclined to laugh about the simplicity of that situation, or maybe a bit sad to see what is going on there, or just interesting. Now that you have looked at that situation from the third party, move back into your own situation. And before fully coming back, take a moment and look at what did you need at that situation. Maybe it was something that you did not need from this other person, that you simply needed, that you wanted from the other person, but actually it was you who needed it. And if you found what you needed, if you managed to find what you needed, and take a last moment of consideration of what you learned about the situation, what you learned about yourself in the situation of conflict, and what you learned about the other person in the situation of conflict, and how this may help you improve your relationship with this other person actually in the future. And then take a deep breath. And I know it was a very short time to go through these three positions and to look at the situation of conflict. Take another breath and come back into this room and into our presentation. I hope you had something nice to learn from this.
All right. Thank you, Clemens.
Yes.
And welcome back, everybody. Let's take a couple of minutes here for questions. If you have any questions about these things that we've talked about so far, please put them in your chat window, or just unmute yourself for a moment and ask those questions. Otherwise, we'll address them later at the end if you don't have any. Give you a few seconds here. Okay, seems to be okay so far. Then let's move on. These were, the first four were personal principles. They are applicable to our day-to-day life, to our private relationships, to our children, to our families, but obviously also very much so in a business setting. Now let's take it a little bit more into team principles. How can we make teams more effective, and what are the key things that we that we usually see that need improvement? So principle 5 to 8 are focused on teams. This fifth principle is a very, very cornerstone principle that we basically talk with every one of our coachees with when we talk about team issues. And it's the principle of accountability and responsibility. I want you to imagine this following situation, that if you're a leader and you're in a meeting and you have a pitch coming up maybe next Tuesday, and you ask one of your people, Tom or something, Tom, can you do the presentation for our pitch? And he says, yes, I'll do it. So it's a very typical situation. But then the weekend comes, you haven't heard back from Tom. Then what's going on? You don't know whether he has even started yet, or whether he's nearly finished with the presentation. So come Monday, you're really concerned what's really going on. So eventually you go up to Tom and ask him, Tom, can you let me know where you are with the presentation? And this might be a straightforward process, but if you imagine that you have maybe 10, 15 or 20 people and you operate the same way, you suddenly find yourself that you're micromanaging, because you have to go up to everybody and say, where are you with your presentation? Because there's no clear accountability and responsibility established. So the first thing that you lose when you operate in that way, which is very common in teams that we see, is that you lose effectiveness, because you have to run around and micromanage people. The second thing is that happens that you're micromanaging, which you probably don't want to do, and your people don't want you to do either. And the third thing, which is very important, is that the trust inside the organization or inside the team goes down the tubes. Because if you don't know whether Tom has started or not, you essentially don't trust him that he's going to be delivering by Monday a certain time or something. So trust gets nudged away. And Tom on the other side gets dissatisfied and says, why doesn't he trust me anymore? I'm on it here. Get off my back. So if you can see that this simple example, missing accountability and responsibility has a super strong ripple effect into any team. Effectiveness, trust, all these kind of things are harmed by that. It's really important to establish that with your team. Again, we take more of a consciousness approach together with a process rather than just implementing a process. We have found that if you're familiar with this sign here, that's the $1,000 fine for littering sign that's all across the United States, that's what you can see if you establish a process without establishing a culture first. Might this work and littering stops? Yes, it might do so. But it takes a whole lot of work to do that. You have to print the signs, you have to put them up, you have to maintain them, and you have to enforce them. So there's a whole overhead of maintaining a process if you don't have a culture or a mindset for the process established. And that's what we see happening a lot in organizations, that new processes are developed, but the mindset is not there. And for every process where the mindset is missing, you have to police it. And the culture is impacted by that, obviously. So the first thing I would recommend, if you would like to improve accountability and responsibility in your team, is talk about this. Have exactly this conversation, maybe give exactly the same example and say, this is why we need to create a culture and a mindset of accountability and responsibility. By the end of the conversation, you basically want your team to say, okay, we get it. If we don't create this accountability and responsibility in our team, trust goes down the drain, I'm going to be micromanaged, and effectiveness goes down. I don't want that either. By that time, you can move towards the process and really install a very simple process that we use to improve accountability and responsibility. I'm not going into much detail about this process, but it basically involves 4 steps. The first one is to make a very clear request that doesn't just say, can you do the presentation, but includes all the details. Can you do this presentation by Monday, 5 o'clock for me, for example? Yeah. The second thing is that we need to do is we need to allow the other person to check in, and actually need to make it okay that they can say, well, let me think about this for a minute before I get back to you. The third thing is that the receiving person, the one who makes the commitment, needs to be very clear what he says. I can commit, I cannot commit. There are certain things that that person can say. For example, also, I need this and this to happen before I can make this commitment. There are 4 or 5 things that a person can respond, which you can put up on the wall and use. And the last part of this process is a very important one, which we call a sincere apology. This is really a critical one that you can install in any relationship, which really improves the quality of a relationship. A sincere apology basically is an agreement that as soon as something happens where I can't keep a commitment, I'll let you know. Not an hour later, not two days later, but as soon as I'm able to make that phone call to you and say, I'm really sorry, I cannot hold my promise to deliver the presentation on Monday morning. My sister just got into a hospital. I need to take care of that. I have a solution, an idea. Can we talk about that, please? If if I'm a leader and I know that my people will call me right away, I can relax and I can take all these things off my shoulders and say, okay, I know they're going to call me if something comes up. I don't need to micromanage. Again, very powerful process. I can really urge you to take it into your relationships, but also into your teams. The next principle. This is a biggie, obviously. The principle of collaboration is what it's all about. Oftentimes, when I'm giving speeches, people are asking, are we really wired to collaborate with each other? Because if you look at the animal world, they're dominating, they're fighting. If you look at our corporations, we're fighting, etc. So are we really wired with each other as humans? Yes, we are, research shows. We all are wanting to work more according to this lower picture here rather than the upper picture where everything is going up and down, because we all as humans want to make a contribution. We all want to grow. So if we can do that and do that together, there's something being released inside of us where we say, yes, this is what we want. And on a neurological level, what's happening in our brains, this is really important too, is that if we are not able to collaborate, basically if we have an environment where we need to pay attention to ourselves, where we need to be afraid that we can't pay attention to our own stuff, we are releasing the stress hormone cortisol. And while cortisol is released, any other hormone, for example, oxytocin, is being blocked. Oxytocin is the hormone that gives us pleasure by helping and supporting other people. So when we work with organizations, we have a 5-step approach that we take them through to build this collaboration. I can't go through all these 5 steps here, but I want to leave you with the most important one, which is to create a culture where people are safe, where they can be themselves without constantly paying attention to what's going on around them and watching out for being nuked. Because again, when we're not safe, there's fear in our system and we are running around with a high level of cortisol. And by that, everything else that we want, the collaboration, is being suppressed. It's by our hormonal system alone and just the way things operate. So the biggest thing that we work with organizations on is how to create this environment where people are safe. How can we do that? By seeing each other for who we authentically are. Most of the time when we work with people, we want them to be a certain way. You have to function this way, you have to be on time, you have to do this, you have to do that. And if you're not working according to this, then something is not good enough. This needs to change. What we need to do is we need to understand the unique personalities, our authentic personalities. And when we do that, we allow people to flourish in that. They might not fit our team, which is okay, because they probably won't be happy here anyway if they don't fit. But still, on a personal level, we can still have appreciation for the individual and handle it that way. So to create a culture where people are seen as individuals. Let's move on to the next principle, which is the principle of full engagement. This, again, is a big one because if you look at the research studies that are out there, engagement is a huge issue. If you look at the Gallup Workforce Studies or any other ones, basically engagement in organizations is between 15 and 30%, which means that 70% of all people are really disengaged or maybe even actively disengaged, which means they're sabotaging the organization. That's horrendous. It's horrendous for the effectiveness of the organization, but much more so, I find it's really, really sad because we as individuals are not fulfilled and are not living our authentic power. And if we don't do that, we make not good decisions in our life usually. So how can we turn this engagement thing? If you look around, you find that many organizations are installing perks. They're trying to be like a Google. They want to have free lunch. They want to have massages, all kinds of cool stuff that binds people to their team and that engages them, which works to some extent. But the way we approach it is a little bit more on a deeper level, which we call the essence level. Let me just explain to you what that is. Essences are the feeling states we experience when we do something. And we repeat that. Essences are the feeling states we experience when we do or have something. So when we want to have a lot of money in the bank, like in the picture here, it's not about the money that we want. What we really are looking for is the feeling states that the money gets us. Freedom, ease, abundance, peace of mind. If we want to have a big company, it's not the big company that we want, but the essences that we feel when we have that big company. Accomplishment, creativity, whatever it might be. Life is a feeling experience. It's not a doing experience. When we get these feeling states that we desire as humans fulfilled, life is good. If we don't get them fulfilled, life sucks, even if we have all the money in the bank that we want. This is a really critical shift in mindset, because when we go to this deeper level of what really drives us, because essences are the reasons for every one of our decisions in life, we can build teams where we can help people fulfill their essences. Let's just imagine you're a leader, and you go to your team and you ask them, well, let's determine your essences. Let's determine what really drives you. And you come up with a bouquet of 10 to 15 essences for each person. Let's say I'm working with you and you come up for me. It will be a very rewarding experience for me to have that, because I understand my deepest drivers in life, the 10 to 15 essences that drive every one of my decisions. Secondly, if you can very simply go up to me and say, you know what, how can I create a work environment together with you where we can fulfill these essences for you, for me, for our team? That's a very rewarding question to have. And if I would be your employee, I would do everything to get my essences fulfilled. So I would come up to you with suggestions. Maybe it's a simple suggestion that says, I want to come to the office at 10:30 one day during the week because I want to have lunch with my wife. And you can say, yeah, that's fair enough. That's simple enough. It doesn't need to cost a dime in order to get me fulfilled and fulfill my essences. So again, a very powerful approach, because we are getting to the root of what engages us in life by addressing essences. There's an approach that we have that we take into teams where we say, let's determine the essences of the entire team and then support each other to build a team where we can live all these essences. And when we have that kind of a conversation, there's always a leap in engagement. People are fired up and they're willing to contribute. Very powerful principle. And the last one, the eighth principle, is the principle of inclusion. Again, it's a very, very big thing. For some reason, really, I don't see it working very well either. Because again, it's much more about a consciousness change in mindset rather than something that we do. It's basically about eliminating judgment. And it's very close to the learning principle up there, because again, we have to shift our mindset from judging another person consciously or unconsciously to opening our minds and saying, what can I learn? Why does he behave in a different way? And how can I connect with that person? We have to, when we work with organizations, we usually change the conversation. We have one big client, for example, that asked us to create the diversity and inclusion program for them because they wanted more women in leadership positions. When we had the conversations with them, we shifted the conversation from women and men to masculine and feminine principles. So we basically had a conversation around what kind of environment, what kind of a culture do we need to create in this organization so that both men and women with the principles that we want are feeling comfortable in this organization. There's some directiveness, maybe there's some action taking, but there's also appreciation of each other or listening capabilities, which are more feminine principles. And it turned out that the organization needed a culture change to make space for more women to be attracted. Not to attract more women, let's do it and let's just put them in the organization, but create a space that would invite more women to come in and these feminine principles. In the end, it actually turned out that in our program, there are 50% men and 50% women, because it turns out that we as men have a lot of feminine principles too. Yep, we do. So, and we want to express them. And there were a lot of men in the organization that were really keen to change the culture towards being able to expressing those principles. So again, if you are thinking about inclusion, diversity, inclusion, make it a cultural topic. These are the 8 principles that if you look at them, if you take a moment and think of any team, if these principles would be applied to the team, how would the team change? Or if you have any conflict situation, would you be able to pinpoint reference to any of these principles and say, well, maybe the actor principle, if that principle would be understood by that person, the person would shift. Our experience is that it's like a toolbox for a leader, for you as an individual, maybe even for an organization, that if there's any conflict happening, any team issues happening, we can choose and pick, oh, maybe the authentic communication principle is not working quite well. Let's focus on that to improve our team. It's a reference guide and a toolbox that helps build relationships and teams. Usually what we do is we teach these principles to organizations. In our current times where things are going up and down a little bit, just open the newspaper. I think it's very important to spread these principles out on a broader level to make them make people aware of it. That's why Clemens already mentioned that we are offering a Conscious Business Ambassador program, which is actually starting next week on the 7th. This Conscious Business Ambassador program, is basically a facilitated program. Let me just say, facilitated program where we take individuals from all over the world, from different organizations, through this second module, through this team module that you see on the bottom left side here. The way we do that is that we have online courses which are self-taught. So as a participant, you get an online course, and every week you'll go through certain bite-sized videos and exercises. And at the end of the 2 weeks interval, you'll go into a discussion group with other people and to massage and to integrate these principles that you've learned, to apply them to your own life, to your own business. And then after this discussion group, we'll go into a webinar together with us, where we will integrate those learnings, where we'll give more practical examples, and where we will answer questions so that we make sure that these principles are really applied to the best degree. Just to give you an overview of this program, we'll kick it off in February 7, and then there's always a 2-week period where after each 2-week period, there's a webinar. There's a little difference in week 5, but basically it's a program from February 7th to April 25, where we will go step by step through this relationship and team building course. If you're interested in this course, please sign up, because we will have this course available for another few days at a rate that is very compelling. We usually charge $11.50 per person when we work with organizations per seat. Until Friday, we are offering this course for $499, and on Friday we'll up it to $695. So we have a few seats available. We want to keep it small so we can work with the individuals in the course. So if you're interested, please sign up until Friday, and it would be great to have you there. Before we close, are there any questions? Let's open up for a few questions in case you have some about the program or about what we've talked about today. Give you a few seconds here to write something if you're interested. Okay. Well, then it seems like we're complete. From my side, I really hope this is something that helps you in your day-to-day life, in your relationships at home, maybe with your family, because as they say, if you think you're enlightened, go visit your family. So we all have some things going on. Hopefully in your job, in your career, to advance in your career, and also to maybe help build teams where people say, wow, this is really cool to work here. There are a couple of things that are coming into the chat box, so let me just look at this. Yeah, thank you.
Peter, can I ask a question before you go?
Please.
It's Joe Delaney here from the UK.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. I work for a couple of organisations in higher education in the UK, and it seems as if recently, certainly over the last year, there's been much more of a dominating style coming in from the heads who run the organisations, and it seems it's very bullying, it's very fear-inducing, not to me because I see it clearly happening, but lots of members of the staff that I work with are feeling considerably stressed and going off with all sorts of stress-related diseases and things, you know. And considering we're a health and medicine-related organization, more and more people are developing hypertension and all sorts of problems that go with it. I've sat and I do a lot of mindfulness meditation. I've sat and I've sort of asked my intuition, what is the role that I have in this? Is there a role? And I just keep coming up with the same thing, is get out of it, you know, because part of me wants to go in there and blame these higher people for bullying and harassment and stuff like that. But it almost seems like I'd be going head on into the conflict. Any suggestions?
Yes, a lot of them. First of all, we see that happening all across the world, actually. And it's what I mentioned earlier, is that our default mode is to go back to the old principles. It's to push harder. So we can see that on a global level with the elections that we had, with Brexit, with a push to the right in many of the countries that we see. It's all a trend that goes, there's a change happening, there's uncertainty happening. Let's hold on tighter to the existing principles. It's in any kind of a transition that we've gone through in our history, that's a typical process. So we have to realize, first of all, from our own perspective, when we work with these organizations, that we are going through the pinhole of a transition. Yeah, we are approaching the pinhole, and there are a lot of people who want to hold us back and want to not go through this pinhole. It's a part of the process. Especially people in leading positions, we find that it's very difficult for them to deal with this. So I don't necessarily believe that the change is going to come from the top, because quite frankly, many of the larger organizations, the leaders have gotten where they are with the existing principles. First of all, it worked very well for them. Secondly, they're at an age where it is oftentimes much too risky to change. So whenever we go into an organization, that's the first thing that I believe we have to bear in mind, that we are not here to change anybody. If we want to change somebody, we create resistance. And again, we have to be accountable for our own contribution, where we operate from fear or we want to push something. It's the same thing, that we're back in the old system. That's why we're trying to not change anything, but to just offer a different system, to offer a different framework, to offer a different thinking, and then find that people resonate very much with it, are very open to that. But we are not attempting to change individuals. By providing this new system, people can step on the train and say, oh, I'm going to ride with you. And by that, the system will change. Yeah, and we've seen that many times. But there's one thing that a mentor of mine said one time, never answer a question that hasn't been asked. So, and I'm paying very much attention to that. So when we see as outsiders a lot of people in stress, a lot of people in struggle, we are not here to fix them. Yeah, I think it's very important for us when we do this work to wait for the question. We can offer something, which I'm sure you do, and then just wait for the readiness of the people. I hope that helps, Joe.
No, it does. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Some other questions?
Yeah, Peter, we have a question from Kirsten Wiegmann.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you handle when a team member clearly is not aligning with the team, and you determine that the best way is to let them go? Do you engage the team in that decision? How do you best handle that situation?
Yeah, again, the image that comes to mind is separation and togetherness. When we see what am I going to tell this person and he doesn't fit with the team, then my suggestion would be to think about it in a little different way. The way we usually do it is to set up a team culture where we, together with the team, develop the common culture of the organization. That's a purpose and also the values by which we operate, the rules of the game. The problem that I see in many organizations is that these rules of the game are not firmly established. So it's just like if you're in a soccer game and somebody takes the ball in the hand and runs for the goal and the referee doesn't whistle. You can't play the game that way. So what I see in teams is that these rules of the games are not firmly established. What means quality? What is the way we operate together here? What game are we playing together, really? And then suddenly you will find that when a team member doesn't align with the team and it's not the right values or not the right game that he's playing, first of all, oftentimes you don't have to do anything because the team will it'll separate like oil and water. It just doesn't fit anymore. But if you do that, if you need to have that conversation with a person that doesn't have the same values, I think that person needs to go eventually, because the values are going to cause a conflict over time. The way you can have that conversation is in two ways. Either you can say, you're not fit for the team, bye-bye. Or again, you can see this person as the fully intact, perfect individual that they are. Yeah, and maintain that vision and say, you might not be happy here. There's a mismatch here. How can I help you find a way where you're really happy, a job where you're really happy? Again, I yet have to find a person that's got let go of their job that didn't love, that really loved their job. So bearing in mind that that person might be very happy if you have that conversation in that mindset, that's probably how I would approach it.
And maybe when you talk about, let me add one thing, Peter, because one question came up, and that would go back to you, Kirsten, is, has there been a discussion of values in that team beforehand? Has there been a process where the whole team decided how do we want to play this game? Or was that a one-sided decision? Because sometimes there are team members that just show what the problem is in the team and they don't seem to align. They would fit in quite well if the whole team would be taken into account. And sometimes it's single members of the teams that seem to not fit in because they just express what is not going well in that team. So that might be a reason for this team member not aligning as well.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question, Kirsten. Any more questions? Okay. It seems that we're through. I really hope that this helped. You have a wonderful evening or a wonderful day wherever you are. Thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate having everybody of you. And we hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.